log into our website, freespeech.org.
Beyond Business, en France 24, en France24.com.
Welcome back to the studio here at France 24. Here are our headlines this hour. Defying a deadline from Kiev, pro-Russian protesters occupying buildings in the eastern cities of Donetsk and Luhansk refuse to evacuate. They say they want to follow in Crimea's footsteps. UN help is on the way in the Central African Republic. Close to 12,000 peacekeepers will be relaying African Union and French forces there, but only starting mid-September. And a first step in addressing ongoing student protests in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro holds talks with opposition leader Enrique Capriles. Hello and welcome. You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. I'm Shona Bhattacharya. Also coming up in the next hour, in business, the French government is under pressure to reduce its budget gap. Finance Minister Michel Sapin says the country will respect the EU deadline of 2015. And in focus, patching up sore relations with Mexico. François Hollande will be signing some 30 contracts there. Our reporters take a closer look at new ties with the French aeronautics industry. Rejecting an offer of amnesty, pro-Russian separatists defied Kiev's deadline to evacuate buildings in Donetsk and Luhansk and lay down their weapons. They want the interim government to agree to hold a referendum on the future of the largely Russian-speaking east of the country. In both Donetsk and Luhansk, there are fears authorities in Kiev could follow through on their threat to use force to clear the buildings that protesters have occupied since last weekend. In Donetsk, though, signs of compromise. Joe Tandy reports.
As night fell on Donetsk, the activists were still holed up inside the city's regional administration building. Members of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic interim government are refusing to budge. Yet as a government deadline for vacating the building drew closer, protesters did offer Kiev a number of compromises.
We are providing the necessary number of rooms and accommodation for workers of the acting government to perform the necessary functions of the city. There will be Interior Ministry troops, unarmed and without special equipment, together with our own security, altogether up to 10 people.
Elsewhere in eastern Ukraine, activists demanding a referendum on their region's future took a harder line. In Luhansk, protesters armed with Kalashnikov rifles were occupying a former KGB headquarters. They say they'll only lay down weapons if Kiev agrees to hold a vote on the largely Russian-speaking region's status. That raised fears that the Ukrainian government could have to act on a threat of force to clear the buildings.
Without any doubt, we're trying to find some compromise. First of all, to liberate these buildings, but those slogans used by those seizing the buildings are unacceptable.
Tension has risen in eastern Ukraine ever since Crimea voted last month to become part of Russia. Kiev has rejected demands for a similar vote in cities like Donetsk and Luhansk, eager to avoid a breakup of the country.
Ukraine's Prime Minister Arseniy Yatsenyuk will be visiting Donetsk later today. France 24's Gulliver Cragg is there and reported earlier on the welcome Yatsenyuk is likely to get on his arrival.
Well, first of all, people here, even those who support the new government in Kiev, are appalled by the fact that Arseniy Yatsenyuk has waited so long to visit the east of the country. It was even 3 weeks before he bothered to make an address in Russian to the people of the Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. Of course, when he did that, he tried to reassure them that his government absolutely does care about these regions and wants to respect the status of the Russian language. I'm sure that's the message he will be bringing again this this time. But to give you an idea of the kind of reception he might get if he tries to meet with local people, even Mikhail Dobkin, who is the pro-Russian candidate, the candidate from the Party of Regions, which is Yanukovych's party, when he visited Lugansk a couple of days ago, he had eggs thrown at him. He was attacked simply for the fact that he is, at the moment in any case, standing for the unity of Ukraine, a united Ukraine without separatism, but with closer ties to Russia. Even that's not good enough for the separatists in Lugansk, so you can imagine what the kind of reception that they might give to Arseniy Yatsenyuk.
Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin warned Russia could cut gas supplies to Ukraine over unpaid bills. Kiev owes more than 1.4 billion euros to Moscow, and President Putin says Russian company Gazprom would now be demanding advance payment for the vital energy source. As it is, Russia has nearly doubled the price Ukraine pays for its gas following the ouster of pro-Moscow President Viktor Yanukovych 2 months ago. If those pipelines go empty, it's all of Western Europe that would be affected. Alex Turnbull has the story.
The letter was sent to 18 European capitals. President Vladimir Putin announced state-run Gazprom might have to cut gas deliveries to Ukraine unless Brussels help pay for the country's outstanding debt.
Russia is prepared to participate in efforts to stabilize and restore Ukraine's economy, not unilaterally, but on an equal footing with our European partners. It's also essential to take into account the investments and expenditures that Russia has shouldered alone in support of Ukraine for such a long time.
Russia says it has subsidized the Ukrainian economy by providing cheap natural gas and financial assistance for years. Putin claims his country has forked out a total of 25 billion euros in price cuts and loans, including a 2.2 billion euro aid package in late December. Yet Putin's letter makes no mention of Brussels' own financial plan to support Ukraine with a proposed contribution of 11 billion euros. The United States has also pledged to help Kiev financially.
The United States is taking immediate steps to assist Ukraine, including the provision of emergency finance and technical assistance. In addition, we're working with Ukraine and our allies on its western borders to encourage them to prepare to reverse natural gas flows in the pipeline so that Ukraine can access additional gas supplies if needed.
But Europe and the US will only be able to unlock the loans once the International Monetary Fund greenlights Kiev's multi-billion bailout plan next month. Russia, the EU, the US and Ukraine are set to hold four-way talks next week, the first meeting of its kind since the crisis erupted.
In other news, promising help for the Central African Republic. The United Nations Security Council voted unanimously to approve sending close to 12,000 peacekeeping forces there. Their goal will be to calm tensions between the mainly Christian anti-Balaka fighters and Seleka rebels that have led to thousands dead and hundreds of thousands displaced. 10,000 UN troops and 1,800 policemen will be taking over from African Union and French troops there on the ground now. But there's a catch. The Blue Helmets won't be arriving before September.
12,000 troops on the ground with a strong mandate to use force if necessary. The UN voted to create a peacekeeping mission including soldiers and police officers. They'll join the French troops and the MISCA African Union mission currently deployed to the country. But the question remains as to how fast contributing countries will mobilize troops.
The United Nations is now hoping that we will generate the forces as soon as possible so that this will be transformed into full regular United Nations peacekeeping operations by mid-September.
Some 4,400 extra men are to be flown in by September the 15th. The rest of the contingent will consist of MISCA soldiers already on the ground. They'll simply switch to a blue UN beret. Meanwhile, humanitarian agencies warn of ongoing ethnic and religious violence, including lynchings and sexual assault. Some are concerned the conflict can spiral into genocide. Yet, the MISCA says it's capable, with the support of the French army, of handling the sectarian violence. For the head of the African mission, the UN will in fact help with the state-building process.
Regarding the organization of elections, with regard to the rebuilding of the Central African Republic and the restoration of the state's authority, the United Nations certainly has an undeniable advantage.
The UN troops will also come in as a replacement for the 850 Chadian troops. They started withdrawing earlier this month after being accused of killing dozens of unarmed civilians.
And now for a look at what else is making headlines around the world. In Northern Ireland, a man has been charged for the 1998 Omagh bombing claimed at the time by the IRA. The 43-year-old is accused of killing 29 people who died in the explosion. He's been named as a senior Republican figure. 3 others have also been charged. The 1998 attack came months after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, putting an end to the Troubles. It was the deadliest attack of that period. In Syria, infighting between rival Islamist groups killed at least 51 fighters, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The violence broke out around a town on the Iraqi border after the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, also known as ISIS, launched an assault against al-Nusra. ISIS had previously taken control of several districts in the region held by al-Nusra and other Islamist groups. Israel sanctions the Palestinian Authority. Israel is freezing the transfer of some 80 million euros in taxes it collects on behalf of Mahmoud Abbas's government. Israel is also suspending a joint gas field development project near the Gaza Strip and capping Palestinian deposits in its banks. The decision came as the two sides held fresh talks mediated by the United States. Talks to calm weeks of tensions in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro began discussions with the country's main opposition leader, Enrique Capriles, in Caracas. President Maduro called for dialogue after ongoing student protests left dozens killed and hundreds injured in 2 months. Hala Mohideen has more.
A landmark meeting broadcast live to the public. The talks between Venezuela's government and opposition are finally taking place, following sustained pressure from Venezuela's neighbors. Even Pope Francis has weighed in, with his envoy delivering a written message urging both sides to reach agreement. In President Nicolas Maduro's lengthy opening remarks, he underlined his government's determination to listen to his opponents.
We've always tried to sort things out through political debate, to resolve conflict through political debate.
He also cautioned against unrealistic expectations from the talks, reservations held by opposition leader and two-time presidential candidate Enrique Capriles. Another key opposition leader, Ramon Guillermo Aveledo, said the talks were long overdue, but welcomed the chance to discuss divisive issues.
We're going to talk about the economy, insecurity, crime and violence, about the social damage caused by impunity.
But not everyone is on board. Student groups who have led many of the recent demonstrations have denounced the talks as a stunt, while other opposition groups refuse to take part until jailed hardliner Leopoldo Lopez is released. Venezuela has been rocked by near-daily protests since February, triggered by the severe economic problems and violent crime that plague daily life. Fatalities now stand at 40, while over 600 people have been injured to date.
Her time in office was plagued by glitches and gaffes. Kathleen Sebelius has resigned as the U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary. She faced the tough task of rolling out President Barack Obama's signature health care law and took responsibility for the disastrous launch of the Obamacare website. Sebelius is stepping down just over a week after sign-ups closed for the first year of insurance coverage. 7.5 million people ended up enrolling in the program. From Washington, Lorna Shattuck has details.
Kathleen Sebelius has made it known that she is indeed stepping down after 5 years in President Obama's cabinet. And this has come about because 2 senior administration officials and a confidant of Kathleen Sebelius have told ABC News that she approached the president around a month ago now and asked to step down. That was after she wanted to step down after the healthcare sign-up figures were released, and those were in fact released today. Just earlier on Capitol Hill, Kathleen Sebelius announced that now 7.5 million Americans have officially signed up for Obamacare, but that does come, of course, after an extremely rocky rollout for the Obamacare website, in particular, in the first few weeks. And aides do say that the president was furious at that botched rollout. No wonder, because, of course, this is one of his signature reforms. And internally, he did blame Kathleen Sebelius. So it does seem that it was for that reason that she stepped down.
Self-obsessed with a dangerous history involving firearms, Oscar Pistorius underwent a second round of cross-examination on Thursday. South African prosecutor Jerry Nell seized on every opportunity he could find to prove the disabled athlete lied about what happened last February 14th. Pistorius, nicknamed Blade Runner, is accused of premeditation in the murder of his girlfriend, Reva Steenkamp. Elena Casas has more.
Prosecutor Jerry Nell tore Oscar Pistorius' story and his character apart, accusing him of lying, selfishness and callousness.
The word, I'm sorry I killed her, is not you're sorry that you have to think of them, you're sorry for their pain and sorrow, but you're not sorry that you killed their daughter. It's not in there.
I'm terribly sorry that I took the life of their daughter, my lady.
Now you say that.
Much of the prosecutor's argument came down to this picture, taken the morning after Pistorius shot his girlfriend Reva Steenkamp. It shows a fan blocking the way from their bedroom onto the balcony, where Pistorius says he immediately ran to call for help.
It never happened, because now you see it. That fan, in the position where it's there, would have blocked you, would have made it difficult for you to close that door.
The athlete says police tampered with the crime scene. The prosecution seeks to prove he deliberately shot Steenkamp. Pistorius says he mistook her for a burglar. Nell forced him to admit he had no reason to fire.
My firearm was pointed at the door because that's where I believed that somebody was. When I heard a noise, I didn't have time to think, and I fired my weapon. It was an accident.
Neighbours at his Pretoria apartment have said they heard a woman's screams, backing up the idea the couple fought. Pistorius faces a 25-year minimum sentence if found guilty of premeditated murder.
And now a quick look at our headlines this morning. Defying a deadline from Kiev, pro-Russian protesters occupying buildings in the eastern cities of Donetsk and Luhansk refuse to evacuate. They say they want to follow in Crimea's footsteps. UN help is on the way in the Central African Republic. Close to 12,000 peacekeepers will be relaying African Union and French forces there, but only starting mid-September. And a first step in addressing ongoing student protests in Venezuela. President Nicolas Maduro holds talks with opposition leader Enrique Capriles. And now it's time for business. I'm joined by Will Hildebrand. Thanks for joining us, Will. And France has been under pressure to reduce its deficit, but it's been unclear if it would stick to the EU deadline.
That's right. As you mentioned, France is under pressure to reduce its deficit to 3% of the GDP. Now, last year, that figure stood at 4.3%, and some economists wonder if France will be able to meet the target of 3% by 2015, which is a deadline that Brussels has extended to the country. Siobhan Silk looks at that challenge and whether they'll be able to make it.
France's Finance Minister Michel Sapin has only just started in the job, but already the pressure's on, with the country's budget deficit running at 4.3% of GDP last year and predicted to come in at 3.7% this year. He has work ahead to bring it down to the Eurozone limit of 3% in 2015. The European Commission has already granted France 2 delays totaling 2 years. After starting the month suggesting he would push for another extension, Sapin is now saying he won't need it. It comes on the heels of the International Monetary Fund's new deficit forecast for France. It matches exactly the target of 3% by 2015.
The growth and deficit predictions made by the IMF reinforce our wish to respect our commitments, which is in France's interest, and at the same time to act to boost growth.
The IMF's growth forecast for France is 1% for this year, slightly up from the January estimate of 0.9%. French ministers have attacked the European Commission for being dogmatic on deficit and pushing austerity at the expense of growth. Paris is committed to 50 billion euros in spending cuts as it works on slashing the deficit.
Now, it should be said, this comes as the Prime Minister Manuel Valls will be meeting with business leaders and unions today. They're expected to discuss the responsibility pact aimed at lowering labor costs here in France in exchange for increasing jobs.
Now, how are things shaping up on the markets there, William?
Well, things in Asia today largely in the red. The Nikkei down about 2% to almost 2.5% on the back of a stronger yen. The currency rose to a 3-week high against the dollar. Asian trading suffering after Thursday's steep sell-off on Wall Street and disappointing economic figures out of China.
Let's take a look now at other company news.
Suisses France is planning to cut 198 jobs. The French clothing and furniture retailer made the announcement as it plans to scrap its paper catalog. Instead, it will shift focus to developing its internet business. The group currently employs 409 people, but since 2008, the French division has lost about 300 million euros.
IBM will acquire Silverpop. The Atlanta-based tech firm makes software that monitors customer behavior, such as commenting on a blog post or watching advertisements. Terms of the deal were not disclosed, but are reportedly in the ballpark of $270 million.
And starting April 15th, Google Glass goes on limited sale for 24 hours in the United States. The internet-connected headset will cost $1,500 and has been lauded as a future of computing and hailed as a death of privacy. The device's most controversial feature is a small camera that can record video or snap photos. Google Glass is an example of tech firms exploring more and more with wearable technologies.
Would you wear one of those, Will?
I don't think I would. I'd have the impression that I'm wearing something from sort of futuristic sci-fi movie. It wouldn't work with me.
Maybe we're a little bit too old, like stuck in the past for that. We'll see. Time now for one last story. This one coming out of China about a new game sweeping the country.
That's right. Now, this is a bit peculiar, but stay with me. People are paying to be locked in rooms, and they're having to rely on their wits to escape. The idea is based on a Japanese video game and has grown so popular that businesses are popping up across the country. And the one company, the one you're seeing here, is Omega Escape Room. They have a staff of engineers that create design settings with a different theme, from murder scenes to hospital rooms and even the supernatural. It costs customers just $10 to play, but I'm not sure they'd be getting my money anytime soon.
That doesn't sound very fun at all.
It's a bit suspenseful, but I'm not sure if I would trust it yet.
All right, thanks so much, Will Hildebrand, with the day's business news. Now it's time for web news, starting with the online reactions to the heartbleed bug.
The Canadian Tax Authority has shut down public access to online services until further notice to protect taxpayers' personal information after a flaw in a widely used encryption method was exposed by security experts earlier this week. A flaw that impacts tens of thousands of web pages across the globe. Hackers could have been using the flaw, the heartbleed bug, to access data since 2011, collecting personal information including passwords and bank card numbers. The revelations have got web users extremely worried, and they're taking steps to deal with the situation. The purpose-built Heartbleed.com was soon set up to keep web users updated on the extent of the problem and answer any questions. The English language webpage explains the measures to be taken to protect systems from the bug, like changing online passwords, for example. The page also seeks to reassure citizens and says a patch has already been found to fix the flaw. News that will no doubt see web users breathe a sigh of relief, although they are advised to check if any of the sites they visit have been affected by the security flaw. A number of platforms have been set up with this in mind. Web users just have to enter the name or address of a web page to find out if their personal data has been compromised by or is vulnerable to the Heartbleed bug. The Better Naked Than Without Liberty online campaign was launched in Venezuela last week, encouraging citizens to pose naked and post a photo to social networks under the Mejor Desnudos Que or Desnudos con la UCV hashtags, pledging support to students at the Central University of Venezuela, UCV, after a recent peaceful protest turned extremely nasty. Government protesters were staging a demonstration on the university's main campus and student opposition bastion of Caracas on April the 3rd, when one protester was taken aside by government loyalists and forced to strip naked before being beaten. Social networkers have shared accounts of the attack, condemning the violence of the armed groups, which are backed by President Maduro. And in a show of solidarity with the victim of this attack, students from the University of the Andes have posed for a series of photos in the streets of Merida. They want to show the regime and its supporters that despite the repression and regular brutal crackdowns on anti-government demonstrators, they will not give up and will continue the protest movement, which began 2 months ago and has since spread across the country. The extremist site FiSyria.com recently posted a video online featuring a balaclava-clad man named Abu Issa al-Andalusi. They claim to be French footballer and former Arsenal star Lassana Diarra, calling on Muslims in the West to travel to Syria and fight with radical militants. British newspaper The Daily Mirror picked up on the story, leaving football fans extremely concerned. But the man himself has since taken to Twitter to categorically deny the claims. Korean mobile phone operator SK Telecom has created an orchestra using old phones and pagers as instruments. The music is to mark 30 years of mobile history and development in Korea, and you can check it out on the firm's webpage.
We'll be back after a short break, but coming up in focus, patching up sore relations with Mexico. François Hollande will be signing some 30 contracts there. Our reporters take a closer look at new ties with the French aeronautics industry. Stay with us.
Down to Earth.
This week, we're down to earth in the United States, about to take you with us inside the Stafford Creek Correction Center. This prison is home to some of the most serious offenders in the state of Washington, but it's better known for the way its inmates have embraced a project that brings science and nature inside with an impact that goes well beyond these 4 barbed wire walls.
Down to Earth on France 24 and France24.com. Down to Earth, brought to you by the African Development Bank.
Reporters.
On the big stories. On April 17th, Algeria goes to the polls, with President Abdelaziz Bouteflika vying for a fourth term. Yet the ailing president is an almost invisible presence on the political stage. Faced with a system that refuses change, Algeria's fledgling civil society is getting organized, tentatively. Barred from public spaces, a new generation is making its voice heard on social networks. Journalists, intellectuals, and opposition supporters are beginning to speak out.
Reporters on France 24 and France24.com.
Welcome back to the studio here at France 24. Here are headlines this hour. Defying a deadline from Kiev, pro-Russian protesters occupying buildings in the eastern cities of Donetsk and Luhansk refuse to evacuate. They say they want to follow in Crimea's footsteps. UN help is on the way in the Central African Republic. Close to 12,000 peacekeepers will be relaying African Union and French forces there, but only starting mid-September. And Angela Merkel heads to Athens. Prime Minister Antonis Samaras is set to meet with the German Chancellor a day after Greece made a spectacular comeback to the international bond market. Rejecting an offer of amnesty, pro-Russian separatists remain defiant as Kiev's deadline to evacuate buildings in Donetsk and Luhansk and lay down their weapons looms. They want the interim government to agree to hold a referendum on the future of the largely Russian-speaking east of the country. In both Donetsk and Luhansk, there are fears authorities in Kiev could follow through on their threat to use force to clear the buildings that protesters have occupied since last weekend. In Donetsk, though, signs of compromise. Joe Tandy reports.
As night fell on Donetsk, the activists were still holed up inside the city's regional administration building. Members of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic interim government are refusing to budge. Yet as a government deadline for vacating the building drew closer, protesters did offer Kiev a number of compromises.
We are providing the necessary number of rooms and accommodation for workers of the acting government to perform the necessary functions of the city. There will be interior ministry troops, unarmed and without special equipment, together with our own security, altogether up to 10 people.
Elsewhere in eastern Ukraine, activists demanding a referendum on their region's future took a harder line. In Luhansk, protesters armed with Kalashnikov rifles were occupying a former KGB headquarters. They say they'll only lay down weapons if Kiev agrees to hold a vote on the largely Russian-speaking region's status. That raised fears that Ukraine's government could have to act on the threat of force to clear the buildings.
Without any doubt, we're trying to find some compromise. First of all, to liberate these buildings. But those slogans used by those seizing the buildings are unacceptable.
Tension has risen in eastern Ukraine ever since Crimea voted last month to become part of Russia. Kiev has rejected demands for a similar vote in cities like Donetsk and Luhansk, eager to avoid a breakup of the country.
In a phone call with Germany's Angela Merkel, Barack Obama urged allies on both sides of the Atlantic to be prepared to meet further Russian escalation with additional sanctions. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin, the Council of Europe suspended Russia on Thursday. The human rights watchdog's Parliamentary Assembly voted to suspend the Russian delegation to protest Moscow's behavior toward Ukraine and the annexation of Crimea. But the 47-member group stopped short of withdrawing Russia's rights altogether, arguing it would not help resolve the current crisis. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin warned Russia could cut gas supplies to Ukraine over unpaid bills. Moscow says Kiev owes more than 1.4 billion euros to Moscow, and President Putin says Russian company Gazprom would now be demanding advance payment for the vital energy source. If those pipelines do go empty, it's all of Western Europe that could be affected. Alex Turnbull has the story.
The letter was sent to 18 European capitals, President Vladimir Putin announced state-run Gazprom might have to cut gas deliveries to Ukraine unless Brussels help pay for the country's outstanding debt.
Russia is prepared to participate in efforts to stabilize and restore Ukraine's economy, not unilaterally, but on an equal footing with our European partners. It's also essential to take into account the investments and expenditures that Russia has shouldered alone in support of Ukraine for such a long time.
Russia says it has subsidized the Ukrainian economy by providing cheap natural gas and financial assistance for years. Putin claims his country has forked out a total of 25 billion euros in price cuts and loans, including a 2.2 billion euro aid package in late December. Yet Putin's letter makes no mention of Brussels' own financial plan to support Ukraine with a proposed contribution of 11 billion euros. The United States has also pledged to help Kiev financially.
The United States is taking immediate steps to assist Ukraine, including the provision of emergency finance and technical assistance. In addition, we're working with Ukraine and our allies on its western borders to encourage them to prepare to reverse natural gas flows in the pipeline so that Ukraine can access additional gas supplies if needed.
But Europe and the US will only be able to unlock the loans once the International Monetary Fund greenlights Kiev's multi-billion bailout plan next month. Russia, the EU, the US and Ukraine are set to hold four-way talks next week, the first meeting of its kind since the crisis erupted.
Moving on to other news, promising help for the Central African Republic. The United Nations Security Council voted unanimously to approve sending a close to 12,000-strong peacekeeping force there. Their goal will be to calm tensions between so-called anti-Balaka militias and former Seleka rebels that have led to killings, torture, and sexual violence. 10,000 UN troops and 1,800 policemen will be taking over from African Union and French troops there on the ground now. But there's a catch. The Blue Helmets won't be arriving before September.
It's not up to the international community to solve our problem. The UN or the international community will never solve a problem for any country in the world. But the UN will create the necessary framework where all nationals, all the citizens of the Central African Republic will sit, discuss, talk to each other in order to find a lasting solution to the crisis in the Central African Republic.
There are 2.5 million people, over half the country's population, who are in need of assistance. And with the rainy season approaching, the conditions these people face will only worsen. We must do more, we can do more, and we must do it now.
For more on this story, Rob Parsons, our senior international affairs editor, joins me on set. Welcome, Rob. The UN's decision, is the UN's decision to send troops enough?
Well, we'll see. I think it's certainly an improvement on the situation as it stands. At the moment, we've got 6,000 African Union troops, some of which are quite good, some of which are less good, but which aren't terribly well equipped. And in a country as big as Central Africa, the Central African Republic, that is a big disadvantage, particularly when roads are in terrible condition. They don't have many helicopters, for instance. Hopefully this new force will be much better equipped than the present one. There are more of them. There will be more of them as well. 12,000, 2,000 of which, or 1,800 of which will be police, plus the 2,000 French troops that are already there. So numerically and in terms of training and in terms of equipment, this will certainly be a bigger and more experienced force. So hopefully it will be able to perform better than the current force. But the situation is so grave that it's difficult to see that even this slightly bigger force is going to be able to cope. Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary General, described the situation as overwhelming at the moment, that the troops on the ground in the Central African Republic are overwhelmed by anarchic conditions. Those conditions are not going to get any better over the next few months. They're probably going to get even worse. So they'll be arriving in a country which is really in the midst of anarchy, not on the verge of anarchy, but in the midst of anarchy, falling apart with no government structures whatsoever.
Now, what happens between now and September 15th when those troops are set to arrive?
Well, it's a big problem. As I just said, you know, the Secretary General, Ban Ki-moon, referring to the situation as anarchic. The number of troops on the ground has just been reduced because Chad has withdrawn its 850 men. Very important men as well, because the Chadian troops were trusted by the Muslim part of the population in the Central African Republic, and they're the ones primarily who are being attacked at the moment. They will feel very much more vulnerable. The situation is that ethnic conflict, religious conflict is getting worse and worse, and it's being fueled too by a vicious cycle of political chaos and economic deprivation. At the moment, there are thousands and thousands of young men on the streets and in the countryside in the Central African Republic who have no jobs to go to, who are not particularly well educated, who are extremely easily manipulated. Until something can be done to restore stability to the political system, and until jobs can start to be created, that's always going to be a problem.
Now, interim authorities in the Central African Republic said that they plan on holding elections in February 2015. How realistic is it that they'll be able to take place as scheduled?
At the moment, it looks as though it's well nigh impossible. 25% of the population is internally displaced at the moment. How are you going to register those people? Does anybody know where they are? There are thousands, too, who have fled to neighbouring countries, to Chad and to Cameroon. We just heard, too, that over half of the population is in desperate need of support. Given those circumstances and the complete breakdown of order, a government which doesn't function much beyond the capital city, Bangui, how is it possible that an election can be organised? At the moment, the key issue, I think, is to get the state back into place, at least to get the basic bare bones of a state back into place, to get the police functioning, to get government institutions working, to start building roads again, to make sure education operates, that the health clinics are opened again. At the moment, I think to talk about an election in these conditions is meaningless.
All right, it'll be a long road to reconstruction. Thank you very much, Rob Parsons, for that analysis. Moving on to other stories making headlines around the world. In Northern Ireland, a man has been charged for the 1998 Omagh bombing, claimed at the time by the IRA. The 43-year-old is accused of killing 29 people who died in the explosion. He's been named as a senior Republican figure. 3 others have also been charged. The 1998 attack came months after the Good Friday Agreement was signed, putting an end to the Troubles. It was the deadliest attack of that period. Australia is bracing for its strongest cyclone in 3 years. Winds gushing at up to 300 kilometers an hour are set to crash into the coast, home to the Great Barrier Reef. The maximum Category 5 cyclone is headed just north of Cooktown, a sleepy coastal community. Residents are being asked to head to shelters as older homes may not withstand the impact of the storm. In California, a highway crash left at least 9 people dead on Thursday. The accident took place north of Sacramento when a tractor-trailer slammed into a tour bus carrying high school students and their families. At least 32 people were injured. The FedEx truck driver lost control of his vehicle, crossed the divider on the interstate, and crashed into a car, then into the tour bus. Angela Merkel arrives in Greece later today. The German chancellor will be meeting with Prime Minister Antonis Samaras as anti-bailout groups and parties prepare to hold rallies against austerity policies. Those cutbacks are supported by Germany, the largest contributor to Greece's EU bailout funds. Merkel's visit comes a day after Greece made a spectacular comeback to the international bond market after a 4-year absence, raising about 3 billion euros. And sending a major signal that the euro crisis could finally be fading. For more, I'm joined by France 24's Natalie Severikas in Athens. Natalie, what can we expect from Merkel's visit this Friday?
I think it's fair to say that both leaders will be basking triumphantly under the Greek warm sun, and that's essentially, as you mentioned, after the spectacular comeback that Greece made yesterday in the capital markets. Now, this is how Greece is showing that it's returning, its economy is slowly returning to growth as well, and there's going to be a strong sign from Angela Merkel to her voters that, you know what, my experiment on Greece, all these austerity measures have pulled off, it's working. And on the other hand, of course, the Greek premier will be showing Greeks that, you know, thank you for all the hardship and sacrifice, it's working, and the German chancellor is here to give us a pat on the back. Nonetheless, she will still push for reforms. She'll say the reforms so far have been paying off, you need to stick by them. And of course, the sentiment on the Greek streets will be quite starkly different as thousands are set to gather while the German Chancellor will be holding meetings with Samaras. The main opposition group, Syriza, the main opposition party, rather, Syriza, is also backing these protesters, even issued an anti-Merkel poster, and all this while the anti-German sentiment is at an all-time high. 7 out of 10 Greeks have negative views of the German Chancellor.
Now tell us more about the importance of Greece's return to the bond market on Thursday. What does this mean for the country?
Well, first, just let's be sure that Greece is not entirely out of the woods yet, right? I mean, 175% it owes, that's the debt it owes of its economy is, is debt, essentially. So it has still a long way to go. But nonetheless, it signals that, first of all, the country is independent from its creditors. It can now go back to the markets and raise debt at a relatively slow interest rate. Greece is currently borrowing at 1.5% from the EU and the IMF. It raised debt yesterday at 4.75, so it's still a big difference, but it's not bad for a country that was completely barred out of the capital markets. So it's a very strong sign that Greece is no longer a pariah in the financial sector or in Europe. It's slowly standing on its own 2 feet, and perhaps it's signaling a road to the end of the Euro crisis.
All right, thank you very much. Natalie Severica is joining us there live from Athens. Thank you, Natalie. Now, a quick look at our headlines this hour. Defying a deadline from Kiev, pro-Russian protesters occupying buildings in the eastern cities of Donetsk and Luhansk refuse to evacuate. They say they want to follow in Crimea's footsteps. UN help is on the way in the Central African Republic. Close to 12,000 peacekeepers will be relaying African Union and French forces there, but only starting mid-September. And a first step in addressing ongoing student protests in Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro holds talks with opposition leader Enrique Capriles. In focus today, patching up sore relations with Mexico. François Hollande is there on a 2-day visit, the first since the end of a 5-year diplomatic standoff involving a young French woman jailed for kidnapping by a Mexican court. But relations are on the upswing as Presidents Hollande and Peña Nieto prepare to sign around 30 contracts and agreements. A large slice of that pie will go to France's aeronautical industry. Mathieu Komen and Laurence Cuvillier take a closer look.
With its 5,000 employees, Safran, the French equipment manufacturer, is the largest employer in the aeronautic industry in Mexico. We are in Querétaro in central Mexico, in an industrial area entirely devoted to this sector, including Bombardier and Airbus helicopters, formerly Eurocopter. For several kilometers, it's all about aircraft. Here, Safran provides maintenance for the engines of 8 airlines. Elsewhere, the company produces motors and wiring. In the past 10 years, they have invested nearly $1 billion in Mexico.
In Mexico, we can find very young and very dynamic people who've just graduated from university. They're also very innovative.
This university is just next door. The Franco-Mexican campus trains highly qualified technicians among the hangars of equipment manufacturers, all made to fit the requirements of the French companies who participated in developing the curriculum and trained the teachers.
In Mexico, it's brand new, the aeronautic, in specific, the manufacturing, because several years ago, we tried to keep the maintenance in the airplanes, and we have many shops for this. Many people are looking for the students, specifically the engineers and the upper technicians.
Here, students benefit from the transfer of skills. They learn French and hope to study for a time in France, thanks to an academic exchange program.
I'm taking part in a scholarship to go and study in France. It would be great because France is a country with many years of experience in aviation. It would be great to bring something from there back to Mexico.
But France is lagging behind. It is only Mexico's 16th trade partner. While visiting Mexico last July 14th, Laurent Fabius announced the creation of the Franco-Mexican Strategic Council. a group of experts and business leaders responsible for improving these business relationships.
What we try to do in this council, with participation from both governments, is to create a French preference in Mexico and a Mexican preference in France. We want to improve this potential, which is still not working as well as it could. The figures are not satisfactory.
This visit's announcements are modest but positive. The delivery of a new set of helicopters for the Mexican Navy and the construction of a drone factory in the north of the country. After a 5-year cold period in the relationship, both countries are finally willing to sit down and talk business.
Time now for sports, starting with the Augusta Masters.
High temperatures and a swirling wind made it a difficult first day at the 78th Masters in Augusta. That didn't stop the American Bill Haas from shooting a 3 under par 68. He takes a 1-stroke lead after the first round. Haas hoping to emulate his uncle Bob Golby, who won the Masters in 1968. The men chasing him hardest are 2013 champion Adam Scott, 2012 champion Bubba Watson, and Louis Oosthuizen. Rory McIlroy a further 2 shots back.
Tomorrow, it's a new day. I mean, I was leading last week after the first round and finished 37th. So I know very recently, I know that there's tons of golf left. And maybe understanding that, I know that I can't expect too much. You just got to go out there and keep playing golf. You know, try to hit that fairway on number 1 tomorrow.
I certainly feel like I prepared very well for this event, and I was comfortable with my game anyway, but having won last year, I think in some ways has taken a little pressure off me as I teed up today, and kind of felt like what was the worst that can happen? I'm still going to be a Masters champion.
French side Lyon are out of the Europa League after losing the second leg of their quarter-final tie 2-1 to Juventus in Italy. Andrea Pirlo setting the Serie A leaders on their way with a trademark free kick. Jimmy Briand scoring for Lyon. Valencia overturned a 3-0 deficit to beat Basel 5-3 after extra time, while another Spanish side, Sevilla, also came from 1-0 down against Porto to reach the semis. Benfica, though, beat Alkmaar 3-0 on aggregate. Not sure what to tell you, really. We were close. Maybe half of our squad was missing, even though I've got nothing to reproach the players for tonight. But sure, we could have come up with some other solutions over the last few days. Over the last few games, maybe we might have taken on this game with a bit more energy. Well, we'll carry on with the idea that we can rival teams like Juventus when we're focused. Doesn't mean we're quite at the same level. We did our best to be up there, and as a consequence, we are disappointed because we couldn't get through. Wout Poels stormed to a superb solo victory on stage 4 of the Tour of the Basque Country. 5 riders had a 1-minute lead with around 25 kilometres remaining of the 151-kilometre stage from Vitoria to Arate, with the Saxo Tinkoff team leading the ensuing peloton behind them. Naturally, the breakaway riders couldn't hold on, and with 10 kilometres to go, they were caught. The riders knew the day's final climb would be a severe test, and overnight leader Alberto Contador, normally so at home on the big climbs, had a go. The 2-time Tour de France winner would eventually finish 10th. Dutch cyclist Poels made his move just short of the summit of the final climb and clung on for the final 2 kilometres to record a wonderful victory. He just edged Movista's Spanish rider Alejandro Valverde by 1 second. Valverde escaping the clutches of GC rival Contador to finish with exactly the same time as BMC's Samuel Sanchez. Contador still leads Valverde by 12 seconds. Alizé Cornet is into the last 8 of the WTA event in Katowice, but only after taking 2.5 hours to dispatch Russia's Kristina Kukova. French number 1 coming through a topsy-turvy opening set, but then pushed into a decider after Kukova raised her game in the second. 4th-seed Cornet, though, found another gear, especially on serve, closing out a 6-3, 4-6, 6-3 victory, setting up a quarter-final with Klara Kukalova. Good news for the home crowd in Poland is that the top seed Agnieszka Radwanska is also through to the last 8. The Pole up against former French Open champion Francesca Schiavone for a place in the quarterfinals. having beaten the Italian in their last 4 tour encounters. And the world number 3 took the opening set after a bit of a struggle, before stamping her authority on the second to complete a 6-4, 6-3 victory. Next up for Radwanska will be 6th seed Yvonne Mersberger. France's top swimmers have been in action at the National Championships in Chartres. Olympic champion Florent Manadou, comfortable winner of the 50 metres freestyle. His winning time, 21.70 seconds, the second best time in the world this year. A good omen ahead of the European Championships in Berlin in August. Star of the day, though, was Camille Lacour, who just missed out on a medal at the London Olympics, but made up for that with gold in the 50 metres backstroke at last year's World Championships in Barcelona. Lacour produced a disappointing 100 metres backstroke on Wednesday, so there's a real return to form. His time of 24.37 seconds, the best time in the world this year.
And that's it from me here on Live from Paris. Eve Irvine has more news coming up with the latest on the UN approving a 12,000-strong peacekeeping force for the Central African Republic. She'll be crossing over to the capital, Bangui, to get the latest. Stay tuned to France 24.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere. In all situations. On every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, a different take on the news.
France in Focus.
Join us for a look at the latest political, economic, cultural and social news from France.
France in Focus on France 24 and France24.com.
Latest news program, France 24, providing keys to understanding complex events through in-depth analysis and putting culture at the forefront of its programming. France 24 airs every day right here on Free Speech TV.
Nah, you don't know me, you don't know me. Lightning above and a fire below me. You cannot catch me, cannot hold me. You cannot stop, much less control me. When it rains, it pours. When the floodgates open, brace your shores up. Waiting for the light that never comes. When I was young, you told me, they said, make your bed, you lie in that bed. A king can
Access Tucson closed forever? Tucson Mayor and Council are considering a budget proposal that sells the building that houses Access Tucson and eliminates all funding. These actions would end 30 years of community media that's accessible to all. Let our Mayor and Council know that Tucson still needs public access to community media. Find out how. Go to accesstucson.org.